Human history is not a story of stillness, but a relentless saga of movement, driven by the urge to cross rivers, deserts, oceans, and borders in search of survival. Again and again, these migrations became the true architects of the world map, reshaping languages, rewriting genetics, and transforming entire cultures across continents. From ancient sea crossings to borders drawn in a matter of weeks, each journey left scars that still shape our world today. In this video, we explore the 10 greatest migrations in history, uncovering where they began, what strange forces propelled them forward, and how they permanently redrew the global landscape.
At number 1, the Out-of-Africa Odyssey stands as the single most important migration in human history, laying the foundation for global colonization and the dominance of Homo sapiens. Between approximately 50,000 and 70,000 years ago, when the Sahara was not a desert but a fertile green Sahara, filled with rivers and wildlife, a small population of modern humans, likely only a few thousand individuals, began moving out of Africa in slow, pulsing waves rather than one organized march. These migrations were driven by shifting climate cycles that temporarily opened natural corridors through deserts and coastlines, allowing humans to expand into new territories. Although earlier modern human groups reached places like the Levant around 100,000 years ago, sites such as Qafsa and School show that these populations eventually disappeared and contributed nothing to the final global expansion. The successful southern route, dating to roughly 70,000 to 60,000 years ago, passed through the Red Sea and along the Indian Ocean coast, leading humans into South Asia, Australia by 50,000 years ago, Europe by 45,000 years ago, and finally the Americas around 15,000 years ago. Archaeological evidence from Pinnacle Point in southern Africa reveals that early humans consumed shellfish rich in fatty acids that supported brain development, giving them a cognitive advantage. Genetic research traces all living humans to mitochondrial Eve, a woman who lived in Africa about 200,000 years ago, while non-African populations retain around 2% Neanderthal DNA from early encounters in Europe and the Middle East. This migration forced rapid adaptation in skin color, cold tolerance, and disease resistance, and ultimately led to the extinction of rival hominids such as Neanderthals and Denisovans. Even so, not everyone left Africa, as isolated groups like those at Takarkori in Libya remained genetically distinct until the Sahara became green again around 14,500 years ago.
Kicking things off at number 2, the Indo-European steppe incursion represents a linguistic and genetic revolution that reshaped Eurasia forever. Around 5,000 years ago, pastoralist warriors known as the Yamnaya emerged from the Pontic-Caspian steppe in what is now parts of modern Russia and Ukraine, carrying a powerful combination of technologies that included the domesticated horse, the wheel, and solid-wheeled wagons. This mobility allowed them to expand at an unprecedented speed, replacing up to 75% of the local population in Central Europe within just a few centuries, as seen in cultures like the corded ware. Genetic evidence suggests this was not only migration but a biological invasion, possibly aided by the spread of an early form of plague known as Yersinia pestis, which devastated Neolithic farming communities and created a demographic vacuum. From these movements emerged the Indo-Aryans in northern India around 1700 BCE, the Hittites in Anatolia with the first written Indo-European language, and the Sintashta culture that developed spoked-wheel chariots. The Kurgan hypothesis describes these migrants as a patriarchal and patrilineal society that imposed a warrior elite over sedentary populations. Today, genetic markers such as R1A and R1B, common across Europe and South Asia, trace directly back to these steppe herders. Nearly 3 billion people now speak Indo-European languages, from English in London to Hindi in Delhi, making this migration one of the most influential in human history. Beyond language and genes, the Yamnaya introduced Bronze Age social structures, elaborate burial mounds called kurgans, and belief systems that later evolved into Greek, Roman, and Vedic mythologies. This single migration reset the cultural and linguistic map of much of the world.
Coming in at number 3, the Bantu Expansion forged the demographic and linguistic landscape of sub-Saharan Africa. Beginning roughly 5,000 years ago in the highlands between present-day Nigeria and Cameroon, a rapidly growing population of Proto-Bantu speakers began a slow but unstoppable expansion that lasted nearly 3,000 years. Armed with iron tools, pottery, and advanced farming knowledge, these agriculturalists moved southward and eastward along newly formed savanna corridors created by climate change, pushing into regions previously dominated by hunter-gatherers such as the Khoisan and Pygmies. Their ability to cultivate high-yield crops like yams and later herd cattle allowed them to support dense populations in environments where earlier societies struggled. As they entered the Congo rainforest between 1500 and 1000 BCE, migration slowed by an average of 300 years due to the challenges of adapting agriculture to humid forest conditions. Genetic evidence reveals a striking gender imbalance in this expansion, with Bantu men carrying haplogroup E1b1a1 largely replacing local paternal lines, while intermarriage with indigenous women preserved ancient mitochondrial DNA. Climate events played a critical role, as the desiccation of the Green Sahara around 3500 BCE pushed northern populations southward, compressing Proto-Bantu groups and accelerating their spread. By the time Bantu speakers reached southern Africa between 500 BCE and 1000 CE, they had permanently transformed the continent. Today, more than 310 million people speak Bantu languages, making this one of the most complete and rapid demographic shifts in human history and a defining force in Africa's cultural map.
Landing at number 4, the Polynesian expansion stands as humanity's greatest maritime conquest across the vast Pacific Ocean. Beginning around 1500 BCE, Polynesian navigators set out from Southeast Asia through Melanesia and into the open Pacific, ultimately settling a 16 million square mile liquid continent that included Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand. Using double-hulled canoes known as waka aurua, they transported entire families, crops, and animals across thousands of miles of open sea with no compasses or maps. Instead, they relied on star paths, ocean swells, cloud formations, and bird migrations, encoding this knowledge in oral traditions and even abstract stick charts that mapped wave patterns. After settling Tonga and Samoa around 900 BCE, Polynesian expansion mysteriously paused for nearly 1,500 years in what scholars call the Long Pause, before resuming with new navigational innovations around 700 CE. This later wave reached the Cook Islands, Hawaii by 900 CE, Easter Island by 1000 CE, and New Zealand by 1200 CE. European explorers were stunned to find thriving societies already established across these isolated islands, all speaking related languages. A famous encounter in 1768 between Captain Cook and the Tahitian navigator Tupaya demonstrated this mastery, as Tupaya could accurately point toward distant islands without instruments. Each migration carried only a fraction of the original genetic diversity from the legendary homeland of Hawaii, leading to rapid cultural divergence such as the Moai statues of Rapa Nui and the warrior culture of the Maori. This expansion permanently redrew the map of the Pacific and redefined the limits of human exploration.
Sliding into number 5, the migration of the Sea Peoples triggered the catastrophic Bronze Age collapse and reset the Mediterranean world. In the 12th century BCE, powerful civilizations like the Mycenaeans, Hittites, and the Egyptian New Kingdom suddenly collapsed under pressure from a confederation of 9 migrating groups collectively known as the Sea Peoples. Egyptian reliefs at Medinet Habu describe them as ruthless invaders who plundered cities, yet archaeological evidence suggests they were likely refugees fleeing famine, earthquakes, and environmental disasters in the Aegean and Central Europe. Tribes such as the Peliset, Shurden, and Denyen moved with their families in ox carts, signaling a desperate search for new homelands rather than simple raiding. Cities like Ugarit were burned to the ground, and a final letter from its king, discovered by archaeologists, shows a panicked plea for help just before destruction. The collapse shattered long-distance trade networks that sustained the Bronze Age, leading to widespread illiteracy and economic regression. Entire empires vanished, and it took centuries for new writing systems and civilizations to emerge. Some groups, like the Peliset, settled along the Levantine coast and became known as the Philistines, while others drifted toward Italy and Anatolia. Despite their enormous impact, the Sea Peoples left no written records of their own, making them one of history's greatest mysteries. Their migration completely redrew the Mediterranean map and paved the way for classical Greece and the Israelite kingdoms.
Taking number 6, the Volker Wandering, or Great Migration, reshaped Europe during the fall of the Roman Empire. Between the 3rd and 5th centuries AD, waves of Germanic and Hunnic tribes surged into Roman territory, driven by instability, pressure from rival groups, and environmental stress. A bizarre climactic climactic disaster in 536 AD, known as a volcanic winter, darkened the skies for 18 months and caused widespread famine, accelerating population movements. As the Huns advanced westward under leaders like Attila, known as the Scourge of God, they pushed tribes such as the Goths, Vandals, and Alans into Roman lands like a chain reaction. These migrations involved entire peoples, not just armies, seeking farmland and security. Rome itself was sacked multiple times, including by the Visigoths in 410 AD and the Vandals in 455 AD. Contrary to their reputation, the Vandals negotiated with Pope Leo I and spared the city from burning or mass slaughter. The Western Roman Empire fragmented into successor states, with the Visigoths in Spain, Franks in Gaul, and Vandals in North Africa. Religious divisions deepened as many Germanic tribes adopted Arian Christianity, creating societies divided by law and belief. This era marked the end of the ancient world and the birth of medieval Europe, permanently shifting power northward.
At number 7, the Mongol expansion stands as a climate-fueled migration that connected the world through conquest and trade. In the early 13th century, an unusual period of warm, wet climate between 1211 and 1225 AD transformed the Mongolian steppe into rich pastureland, allowing Genghis Khan to unite rival tribes and unleash the largest contiguous land empire in history. This expansion moved not only armies but also artisans, engineers, merchants, and scholars across Eurasia, creating the Pax Mongolica and enabling unprecedented global trade along the Silk Road. Technologies such as gunpowder and printing moved westward, while ideas and goods flowed freely between east and west. However, these same routes also spread the Black Death, which ultimately killed between 75 and 200 million people. The Mongols practiced surprising meritocracy, promoting even former enemies like the archer Jebe to high rank, and maintained extreme mobility by giving each warrior multiple horses. A bizarre cultural element was their reverence for owls, whose feathers were worn as divine symbols, creating a trade so intense that owl populations in parts of Europe declined. The Mongol Empire relocated skilled workers across continents, from German miners to Persian astronomers, homogenizing medieval technology. This migration reshaped the political and genetic landscape of Eurasia, influencing the borders of modern China, Russia, and Iran.
Claiming number 8, the transatlantic slave trade represents the most brutal forced migration in human history. Between 1500 and 1880, approximately 12.5 million Africans were captured and transported across the Atlantic in the Middle Passage, forming the economic backbone of the Americas. Enslaved people were treated as cargo, confined to spaces as small as 4 square feet, and often force-fed with devices like the speculum oris to prevent starvation. Mortality rates were staggering, with survival sometimes dropping below 50%, especially on routes to the Caribbean. Although only 5% were taken to North America, 41% were sent to Brazil and 48% to Caribbean plantations, where life expectancy averaged just 23 years. Resistance was constant, from organized revolts like the Stono Rebellion to individuals leaping into the sea. Many captives believed their white captors were cannibals, a grim metaphor for the economic system that consumed African lives for profit. Despite the horror, this migration created a vast African diaspora, with over 40 million descendants living in the Americas today. The cultural impact reshaped global music, politics, and identity, while the wealth generated fueled European empires. This forced migration permanently altered the world map and its power structures.
Holding number 9, the Great Famine diaspora from Ireland transformed the Atlantic world through desperation and loss. Between 1845 and 1852, a devastating potato blight triggered mass starvation, forcing between 1.5 and 2 million Irish people to flee their homeland. Many boarded overcrowded coffin ships where disease spread rapidly and death rates reached 1/3 on some voyages. Bodies were routinely thrown overboard, and ships arrived at ports like Gross Eel carrying scenes of horror. Yet, amidst the tragedy, rare miracles occurred, such as the Jeannie Johnston, which completed 16 voyages without a single death. On its first journey, a baby was born at sea and given 18 names, later becoming a successful entrepreneur in Minnesota. Records from New York alone document over 8,000 births at sea during this period, showing how extreme the desperation had become. Migrants to Canada often faced strict quarantines that killed thousands more just steps from safety. Today, over 30 million Americans claim Irish ancestry, far exceeding Ireland's current population. This migration reshaped cities like New York, Boston, and Chicago, embedding Irish identity deeply into the English-speaking world.
Closing the list at number 10, the partition of British India remains the largest and most traumatic population transfer of the modern era. In August 1947, as British rule ended, a hastily drawn boundary known as the Radcliffe Line divided India into religious states, uprooting between 15 and 20 million people almost overnight. Provinces like Punjab and Bengal were split apart, leaving millions stranded on the wrong side of the border. Communal violence erupted on an unimaginable scale, killing up to 2 million people and producing horrifying scenes such as ghost trains filled only with corpses. Around 75,000 women were abducted, and stories emerged of mass suicides in wells and families killing their own daughters to spare them from mobs. The borders were drawn in just 6 weeks by a British lawyer who had never visited the regions he divided, using outdated maps. This catastrophe gave rise to 2 and later 3 nuclear-armed nations locked in lasting hostility. Even today, the daily Wagah border ceremony symbolizes unresolved trauma. The partition did not simply move people, it tore apart centuries of shared life and permanently redrew the political and emotional map of South Asia.
These 10 migrations prove that the human map is never truly complete because it is a living record constantly reshaped by the movement of people. From the genetic foundations laid by the out-of-Africa journey to the violent religious rupture of the Indian partition, migration has acted as the ultimate reset button for civilizations. Even in modern times, this pattern continues, with more than 160 million people moving to Chinese cities since 1976, creating the largest internal migration in history and driving global economic change. As climate change and political instability intensify, history warns us that another great migration may already be forming. Understanding these past movements is not just about the past, it is a blueprint for the future of a species defined by its refusal to stay still. If you found this journey through history valuable, make sure to like the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more deep dive content, and thank you for watching.